story of Jesus is the greatest story ever told. It helped shape Western culture.
Teacher, leader, savior.
Lazarus, come on.
Okay, enough of that. That's from the History Channel. It's a documentary, of course, on Jesus. They run it every year around Easter. And it's a way to try and attach some history to the whole Jesus thing in a way that really isn't very historical. And that whole topic is particularly relevant to today's show. I mean, that's what today's show is about. I have a Christian history smackdown with a guy I really like and respect, attorney turned author and investigative researcher, journalist, William Ramsey, who was nice enough to kind of indulge me in this dialogue about this history. Here's a clip.
The most quoted and referenced Christian thinker who knew Peter and all those other people, right? So that's also another kind of problem with the Josephus kind of view of the Gospels being, pure political document. But there's some other elements within Christianity that don't comport with the kind of superficial, surface kind of generalized doctrines that Christians and non-Christians perceive as being what Christianity is about.
Yeah, that winds up sounding a lot like gobbledygook to me. I mean, just because there is no, you can cherry pick out of Paul and I can cherry pick out of Buddha. And I mean, again, the part about Christianity that I think a lot of us sit back and go, how are you even processing that, is to say, there's this special time 2,000 years ago. Well, what about all the people that came before? Welcome to Skeptiko, where we explore controversial science and spirituality with leading researchers, thinkers, and their critics. I'm your host, Alex Tsakiris. Today, we welcome William Ramsey back to Skeptiko. William is an attorney, researcher, and author, and the creator of William Ramsey Investigates, which I think is fantastic. It's one of my go-to podcasts that I always listen to. And William was on a while back, and we had just a great conversation. I learned so much. And if you know this show, one of the things that's really influenced me on is this kind of deeper understanding of what's going on in this crossover occult reality, Hollywood, wink, nod, and conflicting that, or contrasting that, I should say, with kind of the atheistic, secular wokeness. Well, none of that stuff could be true. So we had this super interesting conversation last time, and the books that he's written, Children of the Beast, his book about Aleister Crowley, Abomination, about the West Memphis Three, which is really kind of an interesting dive, and especially since so many people just don't know the facts of that case, but you do now that I've hammered on them for so many times. And then The Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11, and the New World Order. Is there anything else that you've written since then?
Well, I've done a lot of kind of letters. You can see it on my blog, on my website. I've talked a lot about this group called the Order of Nine Angles, so more kind of occultism, and so some interesting topics. But
is that going to make its way into a book? Is that an upcoming book or anything?
Well, it may be. I mean, I think there's a lot going on. There's actually been the NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center, put out a flyer saying the Order of Nine Angles is a very dangerous group, and some of their offshoots have been prescribed. Actually, it just happened last week in Australia, where Sonning Creek Division, which has been influenced by some of their ideology, was actually banned as a group in Australia. So they have like 16 banned groups, and then Sonning Creek Division, which is kind of esoteric or occult neo-Nazi. So the Order of Nine Angles is a pretty interesting post-Crowley, post-Hitler kind of new religion. So I've kind of been researching that and writing about that, and I've done some interviews about that as well.
I've heard a couple of your interviews on that. It's super interesting at one level and in another level. And what I was hoping to do in this interview is kind of crawl way up on top of all that stuff if we can, because that's what really interests me is how does this stuff really fit together? And let me back up and actually say one other thing, because the reason I wanted to talk to you about the really big picture stuff is I wanted to approach the Christian part of this. And I wanted to do it in a way that kind of appeals to this kind of attorney, Better Call Saul sensibility, if you will, that I get from you. Like you can talk about all this stuff. Like last time we talked about West Memphis 3, and you didn't get emotional, like pounding on the table and, swinging a Bible around or anything like that. You're just like, hey, I've seen a lot of stuff. I know a lot of stuff happens. Here's how the facts fall in this case. And, what I do with it is kind of another issue, but I can separate that from just kind of understanding. Do you get what I mean? That Better Call Saul.
I think so. I think that, my look into the West Memphis 3, what sparked my interest was that Crowley was brought up at trial, right? So I'd already written a book about Crowley, basically a bio about Crowley, which is prophet of evil. He thought of himself as a prophet of New Age. So when Crowley popped up, then it was kind of like a riddle wrapped in enigma in the middle of a labyrinth, trying to figure out what the actual truth of what happened in the West Memphis 3 actually was. And luckily, all of those court cases are available online, so I could readily access them. And the general consensus was that they were railroaded, and they were 3 innocent kids, and there was kind of like nice sound bites and PR tidbits for the public to ingest. And I believed it. For me, when I first heard they got out, and it's almost been 10 years, I figured that there was just some kind of mistrial or some kind of problem with the case that necessitated their release, but that wasn't the case. So then it was like a lot of then it was like a lot of head scratching to try to figure out what was going on with that case. And my position and opinion of that case and the conclusions that I made are definitely not publicly popular. I think that they're never, and like many other stories or many other things that happen in the world, the kind of darker and deeper elements of that were overlooked and not emphasized in the media or by the corporate media or anything like that. And I think that that's actually very common in all of their kind of superficial analysis of a lot of problems and issues. And 9/11 is a perfect example of that, is not looking into the deeper things. So if you want to get into the Christian perspective, I think it's important to kind of parse through my version of Christianity, which is really a Bible Christian. I don't know myself a Protestant or Catholic. Some people would want to put me in those two groups, but as a Bible believing Christian, I think that you have to I think it's easier to see kind of darker or be more attuned to picking up darker currents in criminal events or just general political events. So, I mean, we can talk about the 2020 election, the problems with that. I mean, so from a Christian perspective, I think that it is definitely a spiritual perspective. I think that it makes you more attuned to kind of parse out these things that really are real. Some of these people do believe in Aleister Crowley. People are Masons. People have secret agendas. There are conspiracies. I mean, all politics is conspiratorial, I would argue, from the beginning of time in any society. So, so I mean, I think that that's really kind of the gist of my books, really. And if you look at Children of the Beast, too, that really was an attempt to take a very broad angle lens at political and cultural events and see, hey, some of these people have occult ideas. Some of these people are promoting whatever their occult kind of outlook is in the public. Timothy Leary, Crowley himself. So I hope that kind of answers what you were trying to get at.
It maybe does, and it maybe opens up the door for this kind of next level stuff that we might talk about. Because when I said this, Jimmy McGill, Better Call Saul sensibility, what I think about, and if people don't have a reference point for that Netflix series, then you might be lost in this whole kind of thing. But I just have to believe, when I first talked to you, you talked about your history as an attorney coming up in DC and just being eyes wide open kind of thing where it's like, oh, wow, there's this whole other reality of how things really work. And all these people that I'm working with are kind of living in both realities. They're living in the reality of how politics is really parapolitics. It's all conspiratorial. It's all, who's blackmailing who has the goods on who has leverage on who, and then
who's an agent, right? Who's a member of a police state, a secret society, secret group.
Absolutely.
Right.
So they're living in that reality, and then they're simultaneously living in this other reality, which is all the normies. And normies just didn't happen in the last 10 years. Normies have been around forever. So when he went home and he kissed the wife and, went out and played ball with the kids, you don't talk about any of that stuff. You don't talk about any of that stuff with 90% of the people if you're an insider in DC. And I think the reason I've referenced it back to Better Call Saul is we kind of get that same thing from kind of Jimmy McGill, who's just, I relate from being, a kid from Chicago, and in Chicago, you want to be a sharp guy, you don't want to be a chump. You don't want to be a fool. And that was part of less like, of course, this is how things work. Of course, the political system is corrupt. Everyone in Chicago knows that, Richard J. Daley electing, John Kennedy. Of course, the entire police system is corrupt. I mean, anyone who didn't know that in Chicago, there were a lot of people that didn't know it, but they were just kind of on the outside. So you get what I'm saying in terms of that sensibility, and you bring that to the table. But then there's a couple of different ways to divide that. So, one, you're talking about just stuff that happens. It's 9/11 or the 2020 election or the pandemic and all that sort of thing. Okay. But then you're also breaking it down on the spiritual side, which is where I think it's kind of a harder for a lot of us when you say I'm a Christian or I'm not Catholic, Protestant, I'm just Bible. But it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Isn't that the same kind of thing in terms of how are you parsing that reality?
Right. No, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's like once you're even within Christendom, it's like, what are you? Like how much do you believe? How much have you read? What books are you reading? What's your denomination? You can say that there's 4 or 5 major Christian denominations. So
there's only one. It all started from one.
Right. This is true, but there's definitely branches. I think in almost any major religion, even Judaism, which is fairly small compared to the large, broad tent of Christianity, or Islam, all have variants and distinctions, and Shia and Sunni. Christianity is Catholic and Protestant at a very general level. So it's really what you believe. What are these people teaching you? Or do you go back to the original text? And I think that's really the key element to really understanding Christianity is really to go to the original Gospels, the 3 synoptic Gospels. There are no
original Gospels. I mean, if we just from a straight up historical standpoint, and that's where I'm saying it's like, what are you going to do? Go back to the Council of Nicaea and Constantine, who is one of the most corrupt, despicable people in history. He murders his son because he thinks he's fucking his wife, and then he murders his wife when he finds out she said him. I mean, this is the most despicable.
Yeah, he's a very opportunistic Christian, right?
So no, he's not a Christian.
Very political. That's what he came out as. I mean, he's supposed to be a founder of the Christian church, or like one of the original.
But he's not, William. He's not. I mean, any kind of fair reading of that history, he never really changes his kind of cultish pagan. I mean, he still has it on the coins, and it just looks like a total sham. The part of that history that I don't understand that Christians don't get is that we're all living rich, complicated, spiritual lives, and they show up all over the place. For Damian Eccles from West Memphis 3, we don't know what his deal is, but we know he has a rich spiritual life, and he's trying to connect with Aleister Crowley and demons and this and that. But he probably is also waking up at 2:00 in the morning going, oh my God, what is this going to do to my soul? Because everyone has those same kind of questions. Constantine certainly doesn't look like Saint Constantine. Looks like a very human guy, who's worried about his wife fucking around, worried about his son fucking around. I mean, he doesn't look like he's had some great spiritual experience with Jesus to me.
Well, he might, but I mean, at least the common historical story is that he was going into battle and then
it's bullshit.
Change. Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, at least that the story is that is how he became a Christian. So therefore, he was one of the founders of that. At least at 3000, one of the political founders of Christianity. But I don't see him as like a great religious figure. Not like maybe some of these other like Paul, for example. But at least that's the way he's regarded, I think, in public. Constantine, but I agree. I think that there's tons of people who say they're Christians who operate without adhering to the fundamental tenets, and that's the same from all religions. I would actually posit and argue that a lot of these political, at least in the United States for sure, these guys who are the presidents, they just give lip service to Christianity. They don't really believe it.
They shouldn't believe it because it's not real. It's just something that was invented.
Okay, well, that's your opinion. So you think that the Gospels themselves were something written by what, Flavian or some kind of, that's the argument?
Here's where I'm coming at from that. Okay. Is like, I come at it back to where we started. Like, you don't want to be a chump, right? That's the Better Call Saul sensibility. Right. So when somebody tells you, hey, those guys in West Memphis 3, they're really great guys who just got railroaded out of town for wearing black T-shirts. And then you read in and you come across the data one after another, and you start putting the pieces together. You go, well, that's just bullshit. I don't know what the truth is. Like I'm saying, I don't know what Damien Eccles' spiritual experience, spiritual reality is. Right. But I'm pretty sure it ain't what he said it is. So that's where that's where I come at it. He's written
some stuff about it, sure. So I think you're trying to make an analogy between the perception of reality based upon what people have about Damien Eccles and then about Christianity. So like you're making a to not be a chump and believe in Christianity. Is that correct?
Where I was really going was, so if you don't want to be a chump, then where do you start, And like one of the places I'd start is like that history that I just said. For any Christian who can't resolve that history, full stop. You better go figure out what the fuck, why you believe in this church that was founded by Constantine when Constantine was this kind of despicable mover and shaker kind of total agent of some kind of cult thing. So because we both
go through the history of Christianity, the same thing. Look at the Catholic Church or Alexander the Sixth.
I'm just saying,
popes are right. The popes are not clean, right?
So I'm just saying, as a Christian,
Church today, right?
As a Christian, I would think that would be something, because I was brought up Christian. I was brought up Greek Orthodox. So a lot of people brought up in the church, and then they start running into these kind of things, and they feel a need to resolve them. But the other way, so that's one thing. I think you have to, as a Christian, you have to resolve the history, and the history is irresolvable. I mean, you can't
it's
jump.
True, but you have to look at it. No question. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
So
then the Crusades are loaded. The Crusades are loaded with tons of problems. They were the Crusades. I think the last Crusade was really kind of a population control crusade where they wanted to take the excess population out of Europe and ship them out somewhere. So they took all the poor people and got rid of them. So it really wasn't really even having anything to do with Muhammad or the Muslims. So there's a lot of things within Christianity. I mean, you can look at the 100 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics, or just some of the most brutal non-Christian conflicts ever, and tons of, reasons for the creation of the United States and all this other stuff. A lot of it came out of these conflicts within these churches. So there's a lot of problems, and a lot of the Christian problems, like justifications for racism, slavery, are the people have referenced the Bible. So there's a lot of problems there. I think you can differentiate it from the original texts and the original Gospels, but some people can't. I don't have a problem doing that. I mean, I think that's really it. So some people can apply to me or just general Christians, hey, look what the Catholic Church has done. And if you reject that, then how can that affect your concept of the original, gospel texts?
Well, because I mean, the argument, and then we can let it go because there's other more interesting stuff to talk about, is there is no original.
Right. Okay. Well, that's where you and I will respectfully.
You can't even. You can't even. I mean, I don't know how you can argue that. I mean, again,
sure. Here's another thing. If you want to look at history, we know that was it Eusebius knew somebody who knew Peter in Rome. So these people who have met Paul, they're in the history texts. These are legit history texts that people knew these people existed. And these are outside of apocryphal texts. These are like legit biblical texts. So I think that kind of the idea that the Gospels were invented 2,000 years out of whole cloth have a lot of problems. And also, there's tons of arguments.
I'm not saying the Gospels were invented out of whole cloth. Okay. I mean, what it looks like. I mean, what do you do with the Nag Hammadi library? I mean,
right.
You just can't resolve that with quote unquote the Gospels, right? Because what you have is all this collection of writings and all these different translations and all these different historical accounts without even getting into the problem of Josephus, which is enormous because he's just completely a propaganda agent for the Romans. So you just look at that. I'm saying from a big picture, you just step back and you say, okay, there's some history there. Right. But I cannot.
Well, Josephus isn't the only history. So, I mean, if you're looking through it through the lens of merely Josephus, who actually had a kind of an admirable reference, I think one full paragraph about Jesus, about he was a miracle worker and a great man. And
yeah, that reference is absolutely inconsistent with the body of his.
I agree with that. It actually stands out. It's like an aside. His real interest is the history of the Jews. And
it was probably an interpolation. It was probably something later on that someone added in because Josephus was the guy. So let's have him say this stuff about Jesus. I mean, that's the natural conclusion, I guess. If you're going to be be the sharp Better Call Saul guy, you're going to go, hey, maybe.
I don't think so. I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you at all. I think that you're saying that you're just assuming that somebody in history went in and re-edited Josephus's text.
That's the general consensus among people.
Well, general consensus of who?
Of people who've really, well, again, so look, like I'm saying, like we can't argue that. People argue that all the time and get to, what I'm just saying is from a this is how the world works, it's conspiratorial standpoint, to me, that's not even a hard one. Because you look at all of Josephus's writings, they would all be completely inconsistent with that one paragraph. That one paragraph, if he wrote that, you could throw out the thousands and thousands of other pages that he wrote.
Well, I disagree with that too, because he wrote the history of the Jews, which a lot of it's very consistent with Old Testament history. And they talked a lot about people who we know from history, all the Roman emperors and who was it? Justin was it? Who was the Flavians? It was Titus and his father.
It was Vespasian. It was Vespasian, right. And then Titus, and then Domitian, and yeah,
right. But I mean, you have all that stuff earlier. I mean, I think they've even found Pontius Pilate's name in Latin in somewhere in Judea. So I mean, there's references there that keep popping up that kind of verify some of that story that's told in the Gospels, right?
Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, again, if you don't see Josephus as completely a propaganda agent for the Romans, you just haven't read Josephus. Because like when I have
read Josephus. I have read Josephus. I've actually recorded some stuff with
I know,
Josephus, but I don't see him. He's obviously a House Flavian, like he's part of that dynasty. Of course, he's going to tell the story of the Romans from the Roman perspective. And he actually, I mean, do you think that what he retells of him giving a speech to the Jerusalem inhabitants who have been captured by the Romans by a huge blockade. Do you think that that's all fake?
Once somebody is shown to be fake, once somebody is shown to be an agent, a disinformation agent, then I just don't know why we would follow him and try and parse out, what's true and what's not. He's clear. Here's the, I can't believe, I've said this to so many people, so many Christians, they've never really read Josephus. Let me pull it up.
I have. I'm telling you, I've read Josephus.
Well,
I haven't read the full history of the Jews, but I've read the history of the wars of the Jews, which was, the whole retelling of the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD.
So let me pull up what I sent you. So this is War of the Jews. Josephus is one of his first bestsellers, 6.5.4. So he says, but what more than all else incited them to war, that is, incited the Jews to war, was an ambiguous oracle likewise found in their sacred scriptures to the effect that at the time one from their country would become ruler of the world. He's talking in this kind of third person about the Jews, of which he is one. He not only is one, but he claims to be kind of a super Jew. And by that, he said, I was so Jewish from the time that I was brought up, and I was so learned in the law that at 14 years old, I went to the temple and I was, kind of talking down to the guys in the temple and telling them what's up, Of course, this is his account, which is completely ridiculous. And it is also, even that point, if you talk to Jews who are really scholarly about this, they'll say, well, he contradicts himself because later in his writings, he doesn't seem to know the law very well, the Jewish law. So he isn't the super Jew that he says. But anyways, here is his big pronouncement. He says, what really incited these Jews? What really drove them crazy was that there was this sacred scripture that told them that at some time, someone would rise up from their ranks and become ruler of the world. And here's what he says. It's important. The oracle, however, in reality signified the sovereignty of Vespasian, right? Who we're just saying is the Roman general who's just kicking their ass and killing them and becomes Caesar, who was proclaimed emperor on Jewish soil. So he says, here's Josephus saying, you know what? I'm a super Jew, so trust me. But here's how our whole religious tradition is based. We had it all wrong. It really wasn't about the Messiah. It was about Vespasian. And where we went wrong was in reading the oracle, because what the oracle didn't see is that when he was proclaimed emperor, which is just kind of a little subtle fact that he was proclaimed emperor in Rome, but he was on Jewish soil. And that's how he kind of is trying to sell this grand conspiratorial nonsense to his Jewish people, that's what makes him the guy. This is so clearly bullshit propaganda. I just
right. Yeah, but I mean, don't you think?
So Josephus is out the window. You can never use Josephus again. He's completely an agent of the Romans.
Well, I agree with that, but I think that you have to look at everything in context. I think your in context is important, but it's also kind of a logical fallacy. If somebody is writing something that everything else that they've ever written is null and void. I mean, it's kind of like extrapolation from one issue.
It's not.
I think that a lot of his stuff, at least the history of the Jews, comports and follows Old Testament writings, right? I mean, he's talking about Moses. He's talking about Abraham. He retells the story of, I think Genesis. So from a different perspective.
But William, this is what gets back to the first part of what we're saying. It's like you're in DC and you're now being woken up to how this shit works, right? Well, of course, 90% of it is totally logical and flies, right? It's the edges. It's the Vince Foster case that you're talking about. I mean, 90% of it looks legit. except, oh, they forgot to put the gun in the correct hand and it doesn't fly out of it. It's not like the whole thing is just completely made up. You only need to make up 10% of it. And you don't, if you make up the whole thing, it's exposed as a fraud. So it's just 10%.
Okay. Okay. You're saying that because Josephus had problems that you're noticing, therefore the whole story of the Gospels is a lie? Is that what you're kind of intimating?
Well, slow down here for a second.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's what it seems
slow
like
down for
across.
a second, because this is this is like one of those things. This is like what would drive you crazy. Like
it's about epistemology.
Like
it's right what we believe, right?
So like here, it is, but it goes back to the West Memphis 3 case, right? Hey, they didn't retry those guys. So obviously they didn't do the crime.
Well, that's what right. I know what you're saying. I get it, but they are still guilty of law. I think their probation ends in August of this year. But yeah, I mean, they're guilty of law. They could get retried.
They got off. They got let out of prison. They don't let people out of prison. If these guys really,
yeah, but they signed on the dotted line that they were there's enough evidence for them to have a conviction of first-degree murder. So
no, they let them out. They let them out.
No, they didn't.
I'm saying, man, you get what I'm saying.
I know. Well, yeah, I think that the approach that you're taking to Christianity is through Josephus. Therefore, all of the core texts that were there, whether it's the writings of Paul and the original Gospels, are...
We're not getting to that. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about...
I think that's what you're insinuating. And that, because that's what you're saying about like how you're applying my view of DC, how like you could have the scales fall from your eyes and see things differently when you're there up close.
Where I was really trying to get to, and we will get there eventually, is that spirituality is real. And we're in this strange situation, which is something we would agree with. And then your spirituality is different than my spirituality. Here's what's super interesting, I think, and important about your work and what comes through again and again, and where it intersects with kind of my worldview and what I've been pounding on, is that the denial of spirituality, the denial of the idea that each of us has this rich spiritual, non-physical experience is part of the agenda. And it's part of the agenda that comes up again and again with, the postmodern, you can't really believe anything, the wokeness, it comes in with the scientific, Luciferian, merge with the machine. Right. You really have no soul.
Communism, kind of you could say that too. Communitarianism.
It is an agenda. It's an opiate. It is what's being sold. It's a social engineering project, because if I can separate you from your spirituality, then man, you are easier to control, right? You are not an infinite spiritual being. You're just freaking a biological robot.
Worse. You're just an accident of time and space, right? That's all. The whole evolutionary outlook is that you're just a random event in a random cosmos, right?
So there's two. So to me, this is kind of my worldview, is that there's 2 steps to this. Well, there's many steps to it, but one step is that, one way that I can kind of get to you is to separate you from your spirituality and convince you that you really don't have a spirituality. You are, what did you say? An accident of time and space. You are a biological robot in this universe, is the way I always put it.
Right.
But then the second, point, I guess, that I'm driving towards is that if that doesn't work, the next thing that I can do is take your genuine spiritual experience and then try and co-opt it. And I see religion as a way of co-opting it, right? So you have a genuine spiritual experience. In a very general
sense. I agree with that, 100%.
So you have William Ramsey has a spiritual life, And his spiritual life is a direct connection with Christ consciousness, if you will allow that, but I totally accept that you are having a spiritual experience with this thing, and I'm just putting that label on it, Christ consciousness. And that I hold loosely the connection with that and the historical Jesus. I'm not saying it's not there, but I'm saying it isn't necessarily as kind of detailed. It has to fit perfectly in order for your spiritual experience to still be valid. And here's where I'm trying to head with that. Because the reason I put it together that way is primarily because of, like, when I went looking for this, I went looking for the science, and the best science I found is near-death experience. So with near-death experience, people are dead. They no longer have that brain. They no longer have that biological robot thing. And they are infinitely more connected to the spiritual. And there's plenty of people that are super connected with Christ consciousness in that realm, and all sorts of different levels of Christ consciousness, but some like literal, I touched the hands, the blood kind of thing, which I don't know what to make of that, but I accept that.
I would say it's a false interpretation
of what?
Gospels. It's obviously, if you look at the Last Supper, Passover's coming up, tomorrow? It's today, right? I mean, the Last Supper is obviously symbolic. But within Christianity, they've made it more literal, especially the Catholic Church used to at the wafer and the wine were literal transmogrifications of blood in his body, which is deranged.
Okay. So
it's symbolic. It's meant to be symbolic. It's clearly symbolic because even in the Last Supper, he's using it as a symbol. He doesn't cut open his thumb and drop blood out. It's ridiculous.
Well, my only point.
Even the blood, we can go in, even within Christianity, people say the blood of Jesus, it's obviously a symbol. It's not the literal blood of Jesus.
Yeah. And where I was going with that, William, is I've spoken to a number of people that have verifiable near-death experiences. And by verifiable near-death experiences, we can say all the medical conditions that they report and we can verify would suggest that they were dead, right? And then these people have these experiences and they report back having spiritual experiences that they identify as being with Christ consciousness. Now, one of the ways that I evaluate whether those experiences should be taken seriously is how they live their fucking life. If they come back and they're walking the talk and living spiritual lives and being good people, and that's what they're about, is love and compassion and goodness, then I say, that seems to be evidence that they maybe had that good experience. If they come back and they're lying, deceptive, cultish, kind of secret society people, which I've never encountered or even heard of in the thousands of cases that have been reported. I've never heard of someone saying, I went to the light after I clinically died and I came back and I decided to go do Aleister Crowley, sex magic and bringing forth the I've never, zero cases of that. I think that evidence is important. And it's impenetrable to the quote Christian beliefs.
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends what version of Christianity or kind of what happens when you're dead. I mean, I think the general outlook is you pass away, the resurrection, you're judged, then you go on to heaven or hell, right? So that's a very general term, but Paul, like we all shine on the sun, the moon, and the stars, right? That whole line or whatever it is from Lenin was taken from one of Paul's missives. So even the Mormons, they actually key into that as some kind of, not resurrection, but reincarnation kind of outlook. So there's a little bit, I mean, if you want to really get into like more esoteric aspects of what people have written, at least Paul too is probably, the most, well, for sure the most quoted and referenced Christian thinker who knew Peter and all those other people, right? So That's also another kind of problem with the Josephus kind of view of the Gospels being, a pure political document. But there's some other elements within Christianity that don't comport with the kind of superficial, surface kind of generalized doctrines that Christians and non-Christians perceive as being what Christianity is about.
Yeah, that winds up sounding a lot like gobbledygook to me. I mean, just because there is no, you can cherry pick out of Paul and I can cherry pick out of Buddha and, Buddha's 500 years before, or there's all these great spiritual people that have had these downloads. I mean, again, the part about Christianity that I think a lot of us sit back and go, how are you even processing that, is to say, there's this special time 2,000 years ago. Well, what about all the people that came before? What about all the people that we encounter in our lives that never had any contact with that experience, that Christian experience, that Christian education, and are more spiritual, we would all say, are what we aspire to be in that spiritual sense. But I don't even want to go there because all the answers are just gobbledygook. Well, what I would kind of bring back, and this is an effort to try and understand the Christian perspective in a really kind of no bullshit way, which I don't think, and I appreciate you doing this because I've never been able to have this.
I'm not worried. You can ask me any question.
So, the next thing with the near-death experience, so number one, I just interviewed this guy, Bruce Grayson, who's been probably one of the most well-known near-death experience researchers, 40 years at University of Virginia, hundreds and hundreds of paper, influenced all these people. Grew up in a very secular household, no belief in any of this stuff, and now believes in God and is able to say that after, it's taken him a long time to be able to say, I just can't get around the evidence. But of course he isn't a Christian, because anyone who encounters the near-death experience research, one of the things that comes through to that is there's no exclusivity. There's no Christian is right kind of Christian, the primacy of Christianity. It just does not come through in those accounts. So if you want to throw out all that research and you just want to say, well, I don't know, whatever they're having, it's non-Christian, so I'm going to ignore it all. You're stepping over probably the best science we have for understanding the reality of spirituality.
Well, I mean, I think that stepping over is one thing. I mean, I think at least in Christianity, they talk about the gifts of the Spirit. So people leave their bodies, they talk to, and whatever they derive in inspiration or the Holy Spirit. So I think some of these NDEs could be put into that context. I don't think that, I think when you're talking about Christianity, you're talking about it in a very general sense, which I don't mind, but I would say my outlook is not pretty independent. So, but I do believe my outlook is definitely Bible based, but
well, it can be Bible based. Yeah, you can control that. But just let me make sure I'm being clear.
Here's even better. The death and resurrection of Jesus Christ could be seen as a near-death experience.
So just let me make explicit what I'm saying is there's thousands of near-death experience accounts at this point that have been recorded. And you can kind of study them in two ways, and you have to. First, you have to study them from a kind of physiological, neurological, medical standpoint and say, okay, were they really dead? And did they really have the experience? So like one of the things they do, William, is they ask people to recall their resuscitation. Well, if your brain is out, your brain is flatlined, your brain is not active in producing consciousness, you should not be able to recall your resuscitation. So it's kind of a good control, simple experiment to see if there really is this extended realm, right? So the science there confirms there is this extended realm. So that's the science on one hand. Then what you can do is start looking at the content of those experiences, right? And you can say, like overwhelmingly, like 90%, what people come back and say, God. They say, hey, for lack of a better term, call it light, call it love, call it whatever you want. I experienced I can't even call it love. There's no words for it, but I'll try and describe it to you because you want to hear it. But it's just complete acceptance, complete love, complete divinity, complete something higher. That is overwhelmingly the finding from the near-death experience literature. It's not tunnels, it's not dead relatives or anything like that. It's God and it's love. So that's the second finding. But the in those findings, the other thing that comes through consistently, if you're going to accept that data, is there is no primary religion. There is no Christianity is the way. They say no. They say there's all sorts of different ways to reach that God, to reach that divinity, and there's no special place for Christianity. If you're going to, so you can reject that and say, well, that's just bullshit. I know because I'm a Christian and that's what I've been taught. But if you're going to follow that data,
most of my reading and research into Christianity is self-taught. So nobody's really taught me anything other than myself.
Right. Well, I wish you'd take that one step further and say, you just have a direct spiritual experience, because anyone who has a direct spiritual experience, like if you pray to Jesus or God or whatever, and you get an answer, I'm down with that. Because to me, that's how the data reads. It's like, you don't need an intermediary. Why would you need an intermediary?
You don't need an intermediary. You don't.
Why would you possibly need? I don't know why people fall for that. To me, that's like such a scam. It's like, really, you need somebody up there, that guy up at the front who says, okay, give me your money, take this bread, and now I will interpret everything for you. Why would you fall for that?
Good question. But here's the thing. Have you ever compared like Christian kind of views of people who have died and supposedly stood before God or experienced God to non-Christians or other people who've experienced NDEs and looked at the similarities or differences?
Yeah, and there's a lot of other people who've done it a lot better than I do. But the main thing that comes through that is key, I think, for Christians to, I don't want to say understand, because that makes it sound like I know something, just to go investigate on their own, is this thing about judgment. Because the consistency, and this is like, to me, it fits back to what we're saying about the classic way that things get co-opted. And that's why I think Christianity is a co-opted spiritual experience. And the one other thing I wanted to mention was this Gregory Shushan guy. But before I get there, I don't want to bury the lead. The lead is, it's completely about judgment. Not every act that you do, every thought that you have, everything will be judged. But you will judge. You will stand in judgment of yourself. Your soul will stand in judgment. And most people, as soon as they hear that, they kind of have a big sigh and they go, yeah, I kind of knew that. I kind of knew that all along. I knew that from the time I was a kid, and I was tempted to take that candy from the store, and there was something inside of me that said I should do it, or, oh, I'm really hungry, I really want it, or I don't do it. It wasn't something outside of you, it was you. It was your soul's journey. And so what the NDEers say is that you, when you die, you are completely supported, completely loved. And the fact that you are now going to face the judgment of what you did through your own experience, that's hard enough for you. We don't need to add on top of that and judge you. You judge yourself.
Interesting. So according to your post-death view, then you will go to some place and self-judge, and then what happens?
Well, there's a lot of questions about what happens, and there's not a lot of definitive answers. But that's where I was going to throw in this last guy. Super important guy for anyone who is interested in kind of exploring this. So I interviewed this one guy. And there's some real tie-ins to the other conversation we're having, because this guy's name is Dr. Gregory Shushan, and super, PhD guy, Oxford guy, barely eking out a living within academia because he's, of course, studying something spiritual, which makes him completely persona non grata. So the way he gets around it is he kind of talks out of both sides of his mouth. He's talking about all these near-death experiences in other cultures. That's his work. Near-death experiences in other cultures throughout time. So he has hundreds and hundreds of year-old accounts from Polynesians, from Native Americans, South Americans, South Africans, all over the place, right? And he's analyzed those over time. What he's found is that in virtually every culture that he's found, the near-death experience forms the foundation of the afterlife beliefs of the group, right? And what he found that's even more interesting and confirming of it, he said in some of these kind of shamanistic cultures, they will have a belief about the afterlife. And then, William will be out there and get hit by a tree and die. And he'll come back and he'll say, hey, this is what happened. And it is such a compelling account that the shaman will go, wait, William, well, exactly. William is right. William must be right. We need to change our beliefs. It's powerful research, because when you go cross culture and you go cross time, you really sort out a lot of the wheat from the chaff kind of thing.
I'd agree. I mean, don't you think there's a lot of similarities in experience between different cultures that are prevented from being understood through language? Like a lot of these people have spiritual views similar to yours and things like that. They believe in the reincarnation or the afterlife or something like that.
Absolutely. But I guess the other thing, tying it back to what we're talking about, is you have to consider the evil part of it, because the evil part of it is the deceptive part of it, is the how do I gain control of someone? How do I dominate someone?
Absolutely. Look at all the religious beliefs, the teachers here that are really popular. They're worth millions of dollars. Some of them want tithe like that.
What was the cult you were talking about at the beginning?
Which one? Order of Nine Angles?
Yeah. So again, it's a mixture of this brew of, these beliefs, and then how can I kind of get in between? Right. It's consistently done over time, whether it's Jim Jones or whether it's the Mormons, which I would throw in that category, whether it's Scientology.
Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, all said that they're right. Everyone, even if you want to look at the sects within Christianity, each one says they're correct. And then they turn the screws. The Catholic Church says we're the only true church, right? So how could you believe in anything else? Therefore, you got to give us money. You have to pay for these priests. And then they engage in the kind of same behaviors that Christ railed against when he was in Jerusalem. So what you can see is Christianity, even Judaism for that matter, a lot of those things are condemned, at least by the faith's founder. I think that even the structure, and look at Christ's teachings of the original Gospels, church, he's outside. He's talking to people in their homes. They invite him to his place. Really, the only religious place outside the synagogue, which he got kicked out of, was the temple, right? And that ended disastrously. People would say that there's no connection between the fall of Jerusalem and Christ's death and resurrection, but I would say that's a direct consequence, and even kind of prophesied that, no stone upon this place will be there after time. I don't remember the direct quote, but you could make a very good argument that the original Christianity as taught by Christ was not a kind of churchianity. It wasn't about these structures, but like you said, I think a lot of these people who came after him said, oh, we got to have a church, and we got to have all this, and you got to pay for this, and we need to have a priest. So then there's priestcraft, pastorcraft, and you got all kinds of problems.
And that's what, my read of all that is, a lot of it came before him too. There's nothing super special about, Jesus, as those teachings come through, are truths, are spiritual truths, and they were always accessible to everyone throughout time, because we all have a rich spiritual experience. We all have a connection with the divine. We can all know what the truth is. Everyone throughout time. 50,000 years ago, an Aborigine on the plains of Australia could access the same truths, but they could also access the same, it seems like, and we don't understand any of this stuff, and I'm not claiming I'm doing, it's just my conclusion. They could also access some of the not so great things, you know,
Right,
and Montezuma's on the hill and he's tearing the hearts out of people.
Right.
That's before Jesus, but he's still and he's still tapping into that satanic energy that says destroy, conquer, dominate.
All right. That's a good point. Absolutely.
Okay, man.
Totally agree with you.
You've undergone the grilling. I'm kidding.
I don't
I
mind.
appreciate it. I don't hear these conversations enough.
Well, let's do it again. Let's talk more about. I will come back with greater proofs that I need to look at the historical proofs, but things like that. But the things that differentiates Christ's teachings from even the other so-called great, teachers of wisdom teachers, whether it's the Buddha, Muhammad, supposedly. What is it? What was the guy who started Zoroaster? Some of these other teachers, even Moses.
Yeah, but I mean, I think really, ultimately, if you do agree with that last thing that I said, and it sounds like you generally did, there's really nothing more to talk about. I mean, it's like the truth is there. The truth is available to everybody. The truth is certainly available through Jesus Christ, what I call Christ consciousness. Anyone can access it. Doesn't need to be filtered through some book. If you pray to Jesus, the statistics show 4 out of 5 people who genuinely pray for help for Jesus to do good things, their prayers are answered, and that you can do good things. You can be a good person. It's not, right. And you can be an evil person too. And it doesn't depend on what you read or anything like that. It's like, what to do and what not to do. I don't know. It doesn't seem that complicated to me.
I'm thinking when you really parse it down, it's not that complicated. It really isn't that complicated, but people make it overly complicated. It's very simple doctrines. Yeah. So
love everyone and tell the truth.
Right. That's basically it. I mean, everything that the law and prophets are based upon, loving your fellow man and loving God. That's it. It was all Christ just distilled it down into 2 simple principles, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, why you don't have to overthink it. Then you can just build on that. You can talk about 1 Corinthians, what is love. You can talk about these other explanations of the proper behavior for the individual. But I just don't see. I guess the real distinction in the Christian view is the primacy of Christianity over all. Like it's the pearl of great price, and I think that people outside of Christianity have a real problem with that. They have I would think that there's more paths to God, whereas like Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. So I think that that's really a lot of the people who are outside of that very, very, very wide tent of Christianity really have a problem.
Well, you could turn it around and say, I think that's the problem that Christians have.
Right.
I mean, if you're Christian and you can't see that there's unlimited paths to God, then I don't know how you're reading the data. It's back I just don't, like I said, go read the near-death experience accounts. Go read the near-death experience accounts and go tell me those people aren't having genuine spiritual experiences. Okay?
I would say off the top that they are having genuine spiritual experiences.
Well, then if they're in, and then they're a lot, but I've interviewed a ton of people. Like one guy I interviewed was Ian McCormick, and he had an unbelievable near-death experience. I mean, this guy was dead he was in the morgue in this little island. He was swimming. He got stung by boxfish, deadly. And he was in their little makeshift morgue for like 7 hours. He had this experience and he saw Jesus, Christ consciousness. Fantastic. But he comes back, he goes around to churches all over the world and says, hey, near-death experience is real. There's an afterlife. But let me tell you, if you don't see Jesus, you didn't really have one. It was Satan faking you. It's like, fuck you, Ian. You're so full of shit. That's just a stupid interpretation of the data. It's just as crazy and as cultish as, Damien Eccles sitting around thinking that, the Antichrist is the way to go for, it's just stupid. And that's what gets me about the Christian thing. If you can't see that it's all about love everyone and tell the truth. So, of course, anyone can get there by doing that. Then I don't know what game you're playing.
Yeah.
If you think it's exclusive, I don't know how you fit that with the data.
Yeah, I don't think that Yeah, I think within Christianity, or the view is that the people outside of it are going to obtain the same blessings and benefits of being inside that wide tent. But
And
I
that's
do
silly.
think,
That's silly.
right? I mean, look at all the people who lived and passed away prior to the advent of Christ, and look at how many people have not heard the gospel. It's hard for me to believe that there's no. It's hard for me to believe that those people there's not some kind of spiritual address from them, from God.
William, what's coming up for you? What are you doing nowadays?
I'm just exhausted. I've been working on a project, so I'm hoping to get it done within the next week. But
William Ramsey
investigates
a William Ramsey investigates project, or some other project?
Yes, yeah. Well, a good proper 400-page book.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I pumped you at the beginning for what book you're working on. You really keep it under your hat that much, huh? You have
to.
Yeah. Why do you have to? Because your publisher? Your publisher requires it?
No. There's all kinds of problems. People steal your ideas, and there's people claim stuff. Oh yeah. Oh man.
Very cool.
I'll tell you stories offline.
Great. Okay.
It's kind of like a small little community. So people are always saying, "This is my idea. I came up with this. Let it be known. I came up with this in this date."
Wow.
So,
yeah. But so the inside word is kind of keep your eye on William Ramsey Investigates, because something big is coming, huh?
Well, hopefully. Well, we'll see. Things are very interesting. Things are happening. There's no question about it.
Playing it close to the vest. I love it.
Always have to keep the cards close to the chest, right? You know what they
right
say
on,
poker?
Baby. Right on. Hey, William, thanks again. Our guest again has been William Ramsey of William Ramsey Investigates. Be sure to check out his website, because I just told you he's got something good coming. I kind of have a feeling it relates to something that we might have talked about, but I don't want to push him any further, because he's not saying it might be. But
I think it'll go with the theme. There's things under the surface that people might not be aware of, like Crowleyism or these other kind of modern currents that are actually pretty dangerous.
Very, very intriguing. William, as always, it's just so awesome talking to you, and really appreciate what you're doing out there. And I appreciate you having this kind of open-ended conversation about
anytime.
Christianity.
My pleasure. Great to talk with you, Alex. Take care.
Thanks again to William Ramsey for joining me today on Skeptiko. The one, the only question to tee up from this episode: primacy of Christianity, yes or no? This is a topic, particularly the Roman Josephus conspiratorial parapolitical part of this, that has really, really grabbed my attention. So I have a number of shows coming up on this. So if this at all interests you in the way that it interests me, then hey, you got some good content coming up. If not, you might be taking a little break from Skeptiko for a while. But I do hope you stick around. Until then, do take care, and bye for now.